It was Friday before just this last Friday, and I had just finished celebrating morning mass here in the parish. It was about 9:45, and I got a call that the brother of someone who I had buried 2 years back was in his last hours. I rushed, and I reached there as quickly as I could to find Louis Poteet in the nursing home, surrounded not by family members, but by caring friends. Now, I've been in this situation many, many times, hundreds of times, where I've been with people as they are transitioning, and one look at people's eyes, and I know whether death will arrive today or not. And in this case, I knew that it was a matter of minutes. I had barely reached back home here, and I got news that Louis had passed away. This last Tuesday, I celebrated his funeral. Folks, now what I have just shared with you may seem like a simple story, but something hit me that evening, that in those few moments, in those few minutes, just a few minutes, the entire mystery of the incarnation, of the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus was replayed. It never has hit me this hard before. I have, including my own father, I've administered the last sacraments, but to be overwhelmed by that fact that in that moment, the entire mystery of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ gets played out has never hit me before. In those few moments, the origin and the destiny of humanity was revealed. In those few moments that I was with Louis, salvation happened. Salvation happened. I would like you now to think of someone dearly beloved that you have lost. I think of my dad. Folks, this is the honest and real truth. No matter what the circumstances of their death, the incarnation, the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus is our hope, our comfort, and our peace. Jesus' life and death and resurrection is our salvation and theirs. So in 3 points today, I want to reflect on not just death and dying, but the different kinds of death that Christ redeems us from. So let's talk about physical death first. Physical death is the most helpless of human experiences. I mean, you are sometimes standing in front of the person that you would do anything that they don't die. But you know what? We are helpless. There is no escaping the grip of death. The inevitability of death, along with the grief of separation, is the most painful part of death. And in today's gospel reading, Mary and Martha and Jesus experience that pain. How many times you find them weeping, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." They grieve, they weep, and Jesus weeps. That day, Jesus offered Martha and Mary a way out of the pain of death pain and destruction that death brings. Jesus said to them, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even if he dies, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? At that moment, Martha made her faith confession, saying, Yes, Lord, I have come to believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, the one who is coming into the world. And in this confession, Martha not only got her brother back, but she found her own salvation. Death is a moment of pain and grief. You and I have all lived it. Even as painful as death is, the death and resurrection of Jesus assures us that we do not lose our loved ones forever. Just as Lazarus was back with his sisters, we too will be together again with our beloved dead. But folks, every death is also a faith encounter. Like Mary and Martha, death becomes for us a moment to confess that Jesus is our resurrection and our life. So every death invites us to make our self-confession, and in that very confession we find life and salvation. Secondly, there is another kind of death, sin, the living death. In today's second reading, Paul says, if Christ is in you, although the body is dead because of sin, the spirit is alive because of consciousness, or because of righteousness. Now, this contrast between sin and grace and between flesh and spirit is a very Pauline thought. Paul, in so many ways, is a dualist. He truly believes that the soul is trapped within the body, and somehow the body is an obstacle for the spirit to experience the righteousness that God has promised. And he was not alone. Most philosophers of his time, this is how they thought. And no matter how we understand the flesh-spirit or the sin-grace dynamic, no matter how we try to understand it, our faith teaches us that it is by sin that death entered the human condition and deprived us of eternal life. And our faith also teaches us that whereas Jesus is a way out of our physical death, Jesus is also the way out of the destructive power of sin. Each Lent is an invitation to recognize the seriousness and implications of sin. Sin is as destructive as death. Sin causes as much pain as death. Sin is another kind of death. Sin is death. But Lent is also an invitation to enter into another conscious process, allowing Christ to redeem us from the destructive power of sin. This Thursday, our 5 parishes will gather for the communal celebration of the sacrament of reconciliation. Let us discern the movement of the Spirit within us and respond to God's invitation to reconciliation, to righteousness, and to life. I want to take a different line of thought in my third point. But I want to do so by returning to the story of Louis Poteet. Louis came from a very poverty-stricken family. There was abject poverty. There was mental illness. There was abuse. There was bullying and ill treatment at school. Lewis and his siblings had a very hard life. None of them were married, and Lewis was the last survivor of the family. His life was a hard and a difficult one. Folks, I hope it's not too often, but don't we meet people who are alive but feel dead? Those who experience chronic depression, those who experience despair and hopelessness, addictions, those who are trafficked and abused and homeless. Many people who experience a divorce feels like it's a death. These are people who know what it means to be deprived of life. So as on the day that I anointed Lewis, there was no family member at the funeral as well. But like Jesus, who wept with Mary and Martha, Lewis's schoolmates, classmates of old, gathered and gave him a fitting farewell. Some of them were feeling guilty because when Lewis was in school with them, they did not treat him right. So they came back to be his family. And I was deeply touched by these men and women who became his family when he had none. So the tiny detail that Jesus wept is not only a comforting detail, but it's also an invitation for us to weep with those who weep, especially those who are alive but feel so hopeless that they feel they are dead. It's an invitation for us to weep with those who weep. Folks, someday we will all die. There's no escaping dying. But while we're alive, we can bring hope and comfort and strength to those who are dying. Any kind of death. Like Lewis's friends, we can bring comfort and peace and defeat the sting of death. We can be Christ to them. Today's Eucharist is a celebration of life. The one who said to Mary and Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. It's right here with us. And how much my own faith confession helps me to connect with my Father who has died is where I find that this Eucharist gives meaning, resurrection, salvation. Let us make that confession today and find in our confession our resurrection and our life. People of God said,